Epigenetics is an emerging area of research in livestock nutrition, genetics, and breeding, posing new opportunities in terms of management and genetic improvement. But what does this science really entail, and how can it be applied in agriculture? Jason Redding from SA Studbook discusses this with us. Daarna gaan kuier ons by Bull van Rensburg, die wenner in die hawerkategorie van die Santam Landbou Nasionale Kuilvoerkompetisie in 2020. Maar vir nou, oor na Lise vir die jongste landbou nuus.
Syngenta, bringing plant potential to life.
In today's news, the value of South Africa's agricultural food and beverage exports has increased by 18% year on year in the last quarter of 2021. This is according to data from Trade Map. This amounts to record exports to the tune of $21.4 billion. The top exportable products includes wine, maize, citrus, nuts, berries, grapes, wool, fruit juices, as well as apples and pears. According to Wandile Sehlobo from AgBiz, the significant factors underpinning this total export value includes the sizable agricultural output of the 2020-2021 production season. And no additional cases of African swine fever have been reported in Mossel Bay and George in the Southern Cape since January 2022. This is according to a report by the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. Veterinary officials estimate that approximately 370 pigs have died due to the disease in these areas. The affected areas remain under quarantine and local municipalities are assisting with the disposal of carcasses and disinfection. The department has urged farmers to continue to implement strict biosecurity measures to prevent the disease from entering their herds. En die minister van vervoer, Fikile Mbalula, het aangekondig dat fondse vir padinstandhouding opgedroog het. So lui 'n persverklaring van Vrystaat Landbou. Hierdie begrotingsbeperking is tydens 'n vergadering met die Vrystaatse LER van polisiepaaie en vervoer bevestig. Vrystaat Landbou is gevolglik gevra om die departement by te staan om paaie te herstel. Die departement kan produsente egter nie vir hierdie uitgawe vergoed nie. Volgens Fransa Wilken, die president van Vrystaat Landbou, bestaan die moontlikheid dat die Vrystaatse plaaslike en provinsiale padnetwerk binne die volgende jaar in een kan stort. En dit is dan vandag se nuus. I'd like to welcome Jason Redding from SA Studbook in studio today, and our topic of discussion will be epigenetics. Jason, morning, welcome.
Morning, thank you for having me.
What is epigenetics?
Well, we can try and explain this as simply as possible.
Yes, please.
So epigenetics is that every animal or person carries a set of DNA, but how that DNA is expressed and which genes are switched on and which ones are switched off is dependent on environmental pressures. So an epigenetic effect would be a change in an observation of a phenotype. So let's use milk yield, for example, from a dairy cattle. We know a dairy cow produces X amount of milk on any given day. If the temperature increases, she'll reduce her feed intake, and she might try to control her body temperature through panting, because cows don't sweat, so they respirate instead. And this may have an effect on a reduced milk yield. So you're observing a reduction in the milk yield. Well, on a cold day, the cow is enjoying its environment. It's a bit easier to maintain its body temperature. It will increase its feed intake. It might drink the normal amounts of water, but it will have an increased milk yield. So this is epigenetics at an animal level. It is being influenced by A, its nutrition, B, by the temperature, and C, by its environment as a whole. If we look at it at a cellular level, say a cow gets an E. coli or a streptococcus bacterial infection, we know that casein is a milk component, and that this gene, in the presence of E. coli, the gene that creates casein, is switched off, meaning that resources that are currently creating the casein gene are relocated to creating an immune response by creating white blood cells and other inflammatory response proteins. So the animal is moving away from creating casein to be having an immune response based on an environmental stressor, which is the bacteria. But it must be stressed that the DNA code itself does not change.
Jason, can animals inherit this?
Well, yes. There are 3 forms of inheritance that epigenetics can be passed down generations through. So the first one is quite simple. We'll use the dairy cow again. She's walking around. She's being fed quite well. She's producing quite a good amount of milk every day. She has eggs in her uterus that they themselves are cells with DNA, but they have the same configuration, which is how whether the gene is being switched on or being switched off. So any environmental stressor that the cow will experience, that egg will inherit those same configurations, those genes being switched on, those being switched off. That is called generational inheritance. Then we have transgenerational inheritance, which is from the grandmother to the granddaughter. So say the same cow is now pregnant with another female calf. That female calf, the fetus, itself has eggs inside of it. So the grandmother is walking around, she hears a loud noise that scares her. And the cells that the cow, the fetus, also experiences that as a stress because cortisone has been released and infects the fetus. And then that fetus being affected by the cortisone, its egg cells are then affected by the stress response. So a grandchild may have an adverse reaction to, say, heights or loud noises because the grandmother experienced that in her life. And then the most obvious inheritance is that they say that you as a person are replaced every 7 years because your cells replace themselves. So when a cell replaces itself, it inherits the epigenetic configuration, the rate of gene expression, the rate of gene activity from the cell it is replacing.
This is very interesting, and I'm sure for us as humans too, it applies.
Very
Absolutely, as you said. Has any research linked epigenetics effects in livestock breeds?
Well, with most research being done on humans and mice are very advantageous to look at epigenetics because of the short generation interval. You can stress a mouse now, and within 1 year, you'll have the 3rd or the 4th generation to test on how did that stressor, may it be a light turning on and the animal being punished, to the grandchild with the light being turned on and there being no punishment, but the grandchild reacting in some negative way to that stressor. That's how it is passed down. With humans, we see this during famine, during times of war, that a generation or 2 down will have the same epigenetic adaptation to times of droughts or famine, which is replicated during times of war. But in cattle or livestock as a whole, the biggest example that I can simplify for everyone is the difference between beef and dairy cattle. We'll use the milk example as well again. So here we have udders. So we know that during puberty, a cow's udder grows as it is getting ready to produce milk. So we have dairy cattle, which are in an intensive system, being milked 2 to 3 times a day. And we have beef cattle, which are on an extensive system, which have a calf with them that suckles multiple times a day, but does not take the same amount of milk as a milking from a dairy cow. So I spoke about at a cellular level. So within the cell, there is an environment that has glucose and other substrates that allow genes to transcribe. And scientists have identified these small micro-interfering RNAs that are small structures that influence the rate of the gene expression. So they come from your DNA and then they interact with how your DNA is expressed. If we look at a dairy cow, she can produce anywhere between 20 to 30 liters of milk a day, and that has to do with the number of milk cells that are present in her udder. So it has been shown that there are these micro-interfering RNAs that are not as highly present in the dairy cattle, meaning that these cells, when the udder proliferates at puberty, the cells separate with nothing's holding them back, as many milk cells as possible milk. But in beef cattle, these two RNAs are highly active, meaning that they repress the number of cells. So instead of a cell differentiating, or a cell becoming another cell by copying itself, it may prevent that. So therefore, these little microRNAs are preventing the number of cells from being more. So that's why you would see a beef cow has a smaller udder than a dairy cow. And so this, because of the intensive and extensive systems that these animals have been existing in for centuries now, that breeders themselves have indirectly selected for these epigenetic effects within the udder.
Well, that was more about epigenetics, thanks to Jason Redding from SA Studbook.
Omdat ek jare terug selfs met beeste geboer het ek altyd so sagte plekkie vir die boere. En ek wil 'n bietjie vanaand kyk na die randdollar en miskien vir die boere wat nie weet nie, ons skryf 'n daaglikse dokument oor die rand, eintlik vir boere om hulle te help om hulle beplanning te doen. Ek het onder andere boere wat met vrugte boer en hulle gebruik ons al vir baie jare om vlakke te kry. Waar kan hulle die vrugte se pryse vasmaak of hoe kan hulle beplanning maak? Wat my 'n bietjie pla en ek dink die rand moet verswak. Want in Suid-Afrika se situasie is net so bietjie, amper kan mense sê polities nie gesond nie. Maar wat sien ons hier? Ons sien hier so 'n linkerskouer. Ons sien hier die massiewe kop en ons sien hier die regterskouer en dit maak my bekommerd. So ek wil net vir boere sê, dalk kan die rand ons net verbaas en versterk. Alhoewel ek dink as die rand bo R15.64 gaan, kan hy baie maklik teruggaan na 15.1889 toe en selfs 16.32, maar die gevaar is hierdie groot lyn. En daardie lyn lê by 13.40. Nou ek weet dit is ver hier vanaf. Maar nou wil ek vir boere sê, ek het al gesien wat baie keer wonder jy hoor 'n grafiek en as jy weer jou oë kon kry is hy daar. Maar vir my persoonlik, my eerste gevaarteken sal wees as die rand onder 14.56 kom. Dan moet jy weet, die rand begin tekens gee dat hierdie regterskouer al meer momentum kry. So wees versigtig, moenie dink dat die rand net kan verswak nie. Ons sal dom dophou. Mense kan baie keer altyd weer kyk, want wat nou baie gevaarlik is van die rand is amper soos 'n mens kan sê 'n jakkals. Hy kan net so omswaai. So ek hou hom dop, maar vir die oomblik lyk dit vir my of die rand wil versterk, behalwe as hy bo hierdie vlakkie van 15.65 begin beweeg. Dan sê dit vir jou dat oor die medium na die langtermyn, dit praat van 'n 3 maande, 4 maande siening, kan die rand verswak. Wel besoek gerus ons webtuiste www.franseklerk.com vir meer inligting en dankie dat jy na die program kyk. Tot wedersien.
Ons medewerker Carin Venter het 'n draai by Bull Janse van Rensburg van Groenwy boerdery by Humansdorp gemaak, waar ongeveer 1200 koeie 2 maal per dag gemelk word. In 2020 was Bull die wenner van die hawerkategorie van die Plaas Media Santam Landbou Nasionale Kuilvoerkompetisie 2020 en in 2021 naaswenner in dieselfde kategorie. Carin wou meer uitvind oor die rol van kuilvoer in Groenwy boerdery se voervloei program en hul kuilvoer maak tegnieke.
Hier is 'n vars hand vol kuilvoer. Die hele idee is dat die voer moet eintlik lekker koel wees en nie warm raak nie. Want as hy te warm is, dan is dit verrot hy. So hierdie is ideaal. Hy is lekker koel en vars. Ja, die die proses om by hierdie produk uit te kom begin in die voorbereiding van die grond, die aanplant van die produk, die haver en die koorrog in hierdie geval mengsel, en dan op die ouene om te sorg dat jy die best moontlike voedingswaarde uit dit kan kry is maar met jou kunsmis en kunsmistoediening proses. En dan een van die belangrikste prosesse is die sny en maak en opkerf en kompaktering van die nat plantmateriaal in hierdie kuilvoerput om seker te maak dat al die suurstof uit is en dat jou kompakteringsproses korrek is. Want as jy dit nie reg doen nie, is alles te vergeefs. En dan is dit die uitvoer weer van die kuilvoer, te sorg dat daar so min as moontlik verliese is deur voer wat onnodig verrot en weggegooi moet word. Want elke kilogram voer wat weggegooi raak is geld wat jy weggooi. Hierso is typies die waantjies of trailers waarin die kuilvoer uitgevoer word. Ons gooi nou maar sekere lek of so saam met dit sommer net boop uit. Of so nie word dit nie hy voermenger daar agterin gemeng wat ons dan in krippe van uitvoer. Maar hierdie werk baie lekker want ons kan die waantjies die hele plaas vir ons sleep en parkeer. Wel, dit is basies die voer wat ons dan nou in die waantjies gelaai het en dit word nou hier tussen die koeie geparkeer vir hulle om dan nou van dit te vreet soveel as wat hulle wil. En sodra die waantjies weer leeg is, word ons kom haal en ons gooi net weer van die voer in. Hierdie is allemaal swaardragtige koeie wat nou opgestoom raak vir die volgende 2 of 3 weke totdat hulle kalf. Ja, is eerste aanduiding of jou kuilvoer van goeie kwaliteit is as die koeie dadelik sommer begin vreet en nie nog staan en ruik en proe nie. As dit nie gebeur het, sou ek bekommerd gewees het dat die kuilvoer nie van goeie kwaliteit is. Ja, iets wat ook baie belangrik is met die maak van kuilvoer is natuurlik die produk wat jy in die kuil 'n put in sou kuil. Met ander woorde, jou oes wat jy afval op die land, as dit nie van uitstaande gehalte materiaal is, die goeie kunsmis met hoë vlakke van proteïen en energie, wat jy dan obvious bereik deur die regte kunsmistoediening tegnieke en blaarvoedings, wat vir jou 'n gesonde en voedingsryke plant gee, gaan jou kuilvoer kwaliteit ook 'n groot invloed op die kuilvoer kwaliteit hê. So jou praktyke daar buite van die dag wat jy die put plant en amper voordat jy die put plant, dit wat jy in jou grond sit in terme van regstellings, kunsmis en daai tipe goed, het speel alles 'n rol aan die eindproduk. So om te dink jy doen die een ding halfpad en die ander ding voluit, jy maak nie 'n halwe job met een goeie ding reg, jy moet die hele ding reg doen.
Klimaatsverandering. 'n vloekwoord van ons tyd, maar 'n onvermydelike realiteit. Grond, gras, veld, water, reën en finansiële kundigheid. Elemente wat 'n sentrale rol in suksesvolle klimaatslim boerderypraktyke speel. Is jy 'n klimaatslim veeboer? Het jy wat dit vat om ons eerste veeplaas klimaatslim ambassadeur te word? Skryf dan in vir hierdie opwindende kompetisie en staan 'n kans om 'n stewige kontantprys los te slaan en om jou kennis en insig aan mede-veeprodusente oor te dra. Vir meer inligting, kontak Draai Lou by 066 231 2430 of stuur 'n e-pos aan draai@plaasmedia.co.za. Inskrywings open 10 Januarie met aanlyn inskrywings op ons AgriOrbit webtuiste. Terme en voorwaardes geld.
BKB, die betroubare tuiste van landbou. BKB, the trusted home of agriculture.